You're going to stay?
You ready, Sean?
Yes, Mayor.
Good evening. We will call the special city council meeting for Thursday, September 12th, 2024 to order. We will begin with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the federally recognized Muckleshoot Indian tribe, the ancestral keepers of the land we're gathered on today. We thank them for their immense contributions to our state and local history, culture, economy, and identity as Washingtonians. Tonight's special city council meeting will be held both in person and virtually. Now, if you'd all please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Sean, will you please call roll?
Deputy Mayor Brown.
Excused.
Councilmember Ammer.
Here.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Here.
Councilmember Rakes.
Here.
Councilmember Clinton Taylor.
Here.
Councilmember Tracy Taylor.
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
Thank you. All right. We do have audience participation in this special city council meeting. This is the place on the agenda where the public is invited to speak to the city council on any issue. Sean, do we have anyone online wishing to provide public comment?
No, Your Honor.
All right, we'll move to in person. I don't see anyone in the audience, but I will ask anyway. Is there anyone that would like to provide public comment this evening? All right, we will move on from public comment. Right. Since this is a special city council meeting, only items that are currently on the agenda are allowed to be discussed. And tonight's discussion item is a continuation, budget workshop number 2 of 3 for the 2025-2026 biennial budget. And I will turn it over to Director Thomas.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am Jamie Thomas, the Finance Director, and I have Frank Downard, our Financial Planning Manager, with us again tonight to go over Day 2 of the 25-26 Biennial Budget Workshop with Council. And first, before I started going through the agenda, I wanted to apologize for Monday night. I was remiss in not, I don't think, setting the stage and setting the tone for really clearly identifying the important roles of council and the mayor and staff during the biennial budget development process. So before we jumped right into the budget development today, I wanted to talk about revisiting the important role that council really does play in the budget development. So council is responsible for setting the really high-level policy direction and goals and priorities that the mayor and staff receive that direction throughout the year in the course of study sessions, council meetings throughout the year, and then most importantly, when we meet for our management retreat in March and April of this year. So after we hear those high-level direction and priorities from council, the mayor directs staff and the directors to go together and build our department budgets with those priorities in mind. So we spend months collaborating, figuring out how we're going to best achieve those priorities and those goals. It's an extremely iterative process. There's continual conversations, and we have limited resources. So at the end of that is when the mayor puts together a proposed budget with all of the recommendations that the directors have put together. And that's what we're presenting to you in this 3-day workshop, in this proposed budget. It's not the final budget, is the proposed budget. And your job here today is a very important one, which is asking how this budget achieves those goals and those priorities identified throughout the year. At the end of the process, we come back, so after the end of these 3 days of budget workshops, we will come back in October with a final proposed budget for consideration and discussion, which we'll have public hearings over. So in the end, council's responsibility is to decide whether or not the mayor achieved the strategies and the goals set forth by council in the most effective way possible. So with either an affirmative or a negative vote of the proposed budget. So with that, I think there was a lot of question. I think there was a little bit of confusion over exactly some of the administrative details when it comes to putting the budget together. So there's a lot of people involved in this process, and we rely very heavily on council to provide that overarching direction, and then the mayor directs staff to actually put the details of those strategies into play. So with that, I'm going to move forward with our agenda for the rest of today, and we're going to pick right up where we left off on Monday, which is with the general fund. And so we have there's only 3 departments left, but it looks like I tried putting Daryl up one more time on the agenda for the general fund, but he'll actually show up later for the capital discussion later. So in the general fund, we still have community development, the police department, and public works to present their general fund departments. Public works will be presenting in the general fund portion the engineering division and the maintenance and operation division within public works. After we've wrapped up the general fund discussion with those 3 departments, we're going to move into the general governmental capital. To start that off, I'm going to talk a little bit about just general governmental capital, generally speaking. What are the different elements, what are the different funding sources, and what are the different ways that we budget for those capital projects. And then we will have Public Works Public Works come up and talk about their capital projects, and then we'll have Parks come up and present their capital projects for the year. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the community development. So if Director Crum could come up and talk about community development.
All right. Hi, good evening. Thank you, Mayor, Acting Deputy Mayor, and City Council members. Yes, I am Jason Crum, Director of Community Development. Happy to be here tonight. Thank you for your time. Our section of the budget our department section starts on page 71 of the notebook, where you will see kind of a general overview of our department's positions and service areas. We have 28 full-time staff in our department, more than half of which are primarily focused on overseeing the development process for the city, so administering and enforcing the regulatory requirements and codes and design standards related to private development, so permitting, project applications, land use decisions, those sort of things. Those groups are our planning services, development engineering, the permit center, and the building team. Our permit center processes typically between 3,000 and 4,000 applications every year. Also within our department, we have code compliance, economic development, housing repair program, and our administrative staff who facilitate the business license program for the city of Auburn, as well as parking permits and point of sale for Auburn Valley Humane Society customers for pet licensing here at the city. Wanted to point out a couple of other responsibilities that our staff and some of our positions in our staff have for the city in kind of decision-making and official capacity. Our department has the SEPA official role for development and environmental issues, as well as the shoreline management program. Our department has the city's certified floodplain manager, as well as the building and fire code officials. Our department also facilitates the public meetings and agendas for Planning Commission, who meet monthly, sometimes twice a month, as well as for public hearings presided over by the hearing examiner. So for those quasi-judicial decisions, for type 3 permits, and also to adjudicate appeal requests by customers asking for reconsideration of decisions that the city has made. Just in general, I think on page 80 is kind of that snapshot of our department's budget. It's 2025 proposed budget is about $7 million. 63% of that are staff salaries, wages and benefits. About 12% are interfund payments for interdepartmental services. And of the remaining 25% budget, was just going to point out and highlight that about 2% is our direct costs for our software membership and associated service fees for our online permitting application process. Our department also kind of pays some of the contributions, obligations regionally. So for things like Puget Sound Regional Council, Puget Sound Clean Air, the city's contribution to SKIP, those go through the Department of Community Development. And then like other departments, I wanted to kind of just mention that our budget includes training budget. So as with other departments, we're very intentional and supportive of professional development and training for our staff. But I also wanted to note that of the 28 staff that we have, 12 of them have professional licenses or professional certifications that require renewal on a regular basis, as well as continuing education credits, just to maintain those certifications and licenses. And some of those positions are required to maintain those licenses just to have that position. It's a prerequisite minimum qualification. So quite a bit of our training budget goes to those needs. To just talk about a couple of achievements from the last budget cycle, we went through every 5 years there's a audit of our floodplain management process through a community rating system, it's called. So we went through that in 2023 to have all of our processes and records reviewed to make sure they're consistent with FEMA requirements and the National Flood Insurance Program. So we went through that successfully. I'm sure, as everyone knows, there's been a lot of significant work over the last couple of years in updating our comprehensive plan and going through that periodic update. And that comprehensive plan is sort of the guiding document for how the city develops and grows over the next 20 years in areas like land use, housing, economic development, climate, historic preservation, all of our utilities, transportation, parks. So we are getting close to the finish line with the adoption of that by the end of this year. So that has been a major accomplishment for our team. And then looking forward to the next year and beyond, there'll be a lot of continued focus on the updated comprehensive plan and the goals and the policies identified therein for all those subject areas, and updating our code and our downtown plan and our associated design standards to meet those objectives identified in the comp plan, which include the kind of assigned growth targets for Auburn in housing of 12,000 housing units and 19,500 jobs over the next 20 years. Also wanted to say, as far as goals next year, our department is really excited to work with Director Goodson Moore and the Office of Equity Engagement and Outreach on developing our department's racial equity plan and moving forward to kind of the next phase of the great work that Auburn and the Ready Coalition have been working on for years now. So as far as kind of the numbers here, baseline changes shown, the 3%, 4% like other departments, and as Director Thomas mentioned on Monday, really that reflects projected increases in staff salaries and benefits for the Department of Community Development. The proposed budget does not include any additional requests. And I did want to note on that page 80, on that summary, if you compare 23-24, just department total to 25-26, you'll see a pretty significant decrease, close to $3 million. And the reason for that is, as Director Hay and Director Goodson-Moore mentioned on Monday, we've had some services and staff that have been relocated from community development into their respective departments. So that represents about half of that. That's about $1 million a change there. And then the funds for SKIP are, I think, 1.5 million, about that, 1.4, 1.5-ish, give or take. Those were relocated from the community development budget into a separate fund moving forward as proposed. And then lastly, there was some remaining ARPA funds that are programmed to be spent in 2024. So those are not reflected in the 2025 budget, and so that's the reason for that difference. I think that's all I had. Yeah, and then moving on, our department also oversees the Hotel Motel Fund, specifically through economic development, and those are funds from the Lodging Tax Advisory Board, who authorize some tourism grants and other funds to support tourism for the city. And you will see that there was some grant funds that are on this year's current budget that were one time and won't be part of the 2025 budget as proposed. So that is community development.
Questions, council? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Director Crum. I was going to ask, I know one of the things that we've talked about that I didn't necessarily hear reflected is the challenge we've had with filling storefronts. Is there anything from a budget standpoint that is either in current goals or planned for within the next biennium that would require budget in support of addressing that?
I don't think additional budget. We do have plans, as I said, related to the comprehensive plan. There's some very specific and intentional goals and policies we've proposed within that plan, particularly to revitalize downtown and be more intentional about our strategies and approaches for recruitment and retention of specifically downtown businesses, but all throughout the city. And so we do have some budget items within our budget that already have been used in the past. It's more about looking at new ways, new approaches for how that budget is used going forward. So it's in the plan, and right now I don't see a need to supplement what's already in our budget, at least for the next biennium.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Rakes.
Thank you, Jason. I have a question on line item detail report. So on page 91, under miscellaneous. I'll let you find it first.
Okay,
I think it's,
Oh.
we're in the general still, so
Yeah.
the front section.
It's page 91.
I'm
Oh, you got it.
following, yeah.
Okay, so under that, for the business improvement area, is that the amount that we're supplying to the BIA then? That is, okay. That's all I wanted to know.
Okay.
Other questions, council? All right, thank you, Director Crum.
Thank you.
All right, next up, I'm going to have Chief Collier come up, and we'll probably have Director Gaub come up too at the same time.
Good afternoon, Council. For the record, Chief Mark Collier for the police. And Director Galb is going to be joining me for one of the new request items when we get to that point. So just a quick overview of the Auburn Police Department. We are a full-service agency. We have 140 authorized staff, 118 current commissioned staff, and then 22 authorized non-commissioned staff, which is comprised of our records unit, crime analyst, things of that nature. Some of the accomplishments in the last budget cycle, we provided some targeted emphasis patrol areas in certain sections of the city that were highly successful. During some of the recent legislative changes, I think everybody kind of saw what was happening in our downtown area, some of the things we couldn't do. And so once legislative changes happened, we were really able to focus on those areas and take enforcement as needed. We also worked on creating a APD recruiting team to help entice officers to come to, both entry and lateral officers to come to Auburn. Part of what we did was we worked with an outside marketing firm to create a Auburn specific recruiting website that we play at publicsafetytesting.com, which is for entry-level officers. Kind of give them an overview of our agency, what would make that attractive to them. We assign mentors to candidates so that if they have questions during the process, they can call somebody right away. So they really get a more personal touch. And we have been successful attracting new officers that way. We continue to expand our wellness program. That was, the full-time FTE was converted, I want to say, in the last budget cycle. That's, I could call him Chaplain. He's still a chaplain for us, but Angel Oganda oversees that. He is our wellness program director. So we have been expanding that and making those programs available to all of our staff, not just officers. Some of our major goals for the next budget cycle is we continue to look for ways to improve our budget efficiency. Police technology is consistently increasing and improving, and so we are constantly looking at latest technology, how we can utilize that in Auburn for various things to kind of take the burden off some of the things that tie up officers' time right now. And so we will continue to do that. We continue to look at innovative ways to both attract and retain staff. I think we've talked about it on many council sessions before about the low number of officers in Washington in general and how that translates into our staffing issues. We continue to improve our community relations. We use social media. We do have a full-time PIO. We conduct outreach into the neighborhoods with our CRT team. And we've also, as we've talked about at a prior council meeting, we are in a pilot program with Project Be Free to address some of our ongoing domestic violence issues that we have in the city. One of the things that is, I will note in our in the budget book, we outline kind of where we're at in the past 2 years. 2023, we are down significantly in domestic violence calls from the prior 2 years from COVID. We hope that trend continues even more so as we complete the pilot program with Project Be Free. The goal of that program is, of course, is to reduce the amount of repeat calls among families. And then we are continuing our wellness program. And so the more we can focus on officers and our staff, physical, mental, and spiritual well-being leads to a longer employment time in our agency because of, at least for commissioned officers, officers are required to go till age 53 before they can retire. That length of time does take a physical and mental toll on you. Having the program has helped, I believe, cut down on a lot of, because it's part of it is physical, it's cut down on a lot of injuries that we see throughout the year, which helps the city in regards to L&I claims and things of that nature. So those are some of the things we continue to focus on. Our department overall, we have 5 divisions. Really, one division is a division of 1. That's our inspectional services division. So we have 1 commander assigned to that. Our largest division is the patrol division, where we have 2 commanders assigned to oversee that division, and then investigations and community programs unit. As we move into the budget highlights, our baseline change over this current budget is about $1.6 million in 2025 and $1.6 million in 2026. The majority of those costs are all due to wages, salaries, and benefits. We did not increase any other line items in our budget. And part of those wages, salaries, and benefits, where we saw the most impact, again, was in the liability insurance. A very large increase in 2025, and then almost double again in 2026. Those are, those are things we have to look at with the staff we have, and it can be significant. We are, I think, 37% of the general fund budget.
Yes, right.
So a lot of the budget already goes to PD. We are aware of that, so we try to limit the increases that we have year to year. Our new request, though, our hope is to address some of the issues we've seen with the increase in Auburn's population, some of the reporting of crimes that have been happening in Auburn, and that is the addition of 10 new commissioned officers that will increase our authorized commission staff to 128. We do look at other ways to help that funding as far as grants. Unfortunately for us, we don't hear back. Those grants are federal grants. We don't hear back from them until usually mid-October, once we've already started our budget process. With our 10 new commissioned officers that we are looking at, part of that, the funding is coming from the photo enforcement that we will be hoping to present, and Director Gao can kind of help me along with that and talk about the actual details of the photo enforcement program itself.
So for that particular program improvement for the photo enforcement, so this would be the expansion to the new legislative authorized photo enforcement for general speed enforcement on city streets. So what we are looking at there is the legislation allows us right now, based on our population, to add about 9 cameras for photo enforcement around the city. And when we increase to 90,000 in population, that will increase the amount of traffic cameras that we can do to up to 10. The existing school zone photo enforcement program, as you are all aware from our presentation of kind of how that went in that first year, has had a significant impact and a reduction in the amount of incidents that we see or the amount of speeding that we see occurring in those school zones. So we hope to see similar results from a photo enforcement program on regular speeding control. The intent behind this request would be implementing anywhere from 3 cameras up to the maximum allowed by the legislation. A lot of that just depends upon doing the study that's necessary under the state legislation to identify the locations that we can put the cameras in and actually have them in operation. In addition, the legislation limits and caps the fee for those infractions at $145. Those infractions are still considered parking tickets, similar to how the school zone enforcement is. The school zone, as a comparison, the school zone enforcement tickets are actually at $200 right now, so it's a little different in that revenue stream. But because these cameras would operate 24/7 instead of, as the school zones do, only during enforcement times, both before, after, and at that middle break time for some of the schools, you would see a significant increase in the amount of tickets that would be generated through the photo enforcement program, which is why we also include in this request the need for additional officers for doing that processing of those tickets to generate, to go through that process. So part of that will also require us in 2025 to come and do a code update to allow us to do this type of enforcement, as well as negotiate a contract with the vendor to provide the photo enforcement, and then complete those evaluations and study that's required by the legislative process. We expect to do all of that in 2025 with the intent of trying to implement new cameras in January of 2026 and start seeing that revenue generation for paying for the system. Again, similar to how the school zones are, the intent would be is that this first and foremost pays for the system and the cost of operating that system, including the PD, the court, legal staff time, all of the staff time to administer that program, and then additional revenues can be used as the city identifies in the budget. This would also, as with the school enforcement program, when we implement new cameras, there would be a 30-day warning period where no tickets would be issued, just warnings would be issued to those that are found to be speeding through the zone. This also is it encourages changes in driver behavior by reducing that speeding that's happening out there, which is consistent with, as you might recall, the previous conversations on our draft comprehensive transportation plan policies, as well as it will be consistent with our comprehensive safety action plan, which we'll be discussing with the council in the coming weeks. And also, it's in accordance with the safe systems approach for ways to try to address some of the issues that happen with traffic safety. With that, if there are any questions on this.
Council, are there any questions? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. So my question is, if we're talking about having an increase of 10 headcount, how many would go to just supporting the traffic camera program, and how many would be for, being available for other policing activities?
So the goal is to add at least one of those officers to our current traffic unit, which handles the majority of the school safety zone cameras right now. The rest, we're looking at putting majority of them in our patrol division so we can increase our minimum staffing levels in patrol. Right now, we have a minimum staffing level of a sergeant plus 7 officers, and so we're looking to increase that to a sergeant and 8. And so that gives us more officers because some of the legislative changes, we have to send more officers to calls that normally prior maybe took 1 or 2 officers. Now multiple officers have to go to those calls, so it ties them up. So as we've talked about before, we see our response times to those priority 2, 3, and 4 calls have been increasing the last several years. So the hope is having more officers on those during those heavier hours is that we still have the same number of officers that would be going to those calls, but with more additional officers, they are free to handle other calls and help reduce those response times.
Other questions, council?
If I can provide one other clarification there. So the intent is to only move forward with 3 locations initially, and part of that is to get a feel for how many infractions are getting issued, because the number of infractions issued will dictate how much of the police staff time is necessary for processing those tickets and how many of those officers are necessary for the processing of those tickets. So as we implement the program and potentially increase cameras in the future, then we can evaluate better what that actually looks like for staff time.
Acting Deputy Mayor Trout-Manuel.
Thank you for this report. It was very informative. On that line of thought, Do we have a data up to now of how many tickets have been issued since we put those cameras up?
So we do. I don't have the exact number as of today, but I do know that for the 2023-2024 school year, we issued just under 29,000 infractions throughout the school year. So it's about 28,800 something.
We can follow up with the actual data after the.
I was just going to ask that. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. So one of the things that I've been hearing recently from our residents is that they feel there's been an increase in violence in the community. I think that's reflected in a recent news report we had with our mayor. And so when we're talking about what's going to be the best way to address crime and gun violence in the city, is there anything within this budget, apart from increasing staff headcount for each shift, that is going to work towards that? Whether it's implementing more cameras to, you know, catch people throughout the city, or I'm looking for what should we be doing in that space?
So, some of the things that we are looking at is ways to free up time of the officers we have regarding the time it takes to actually write a report where you're off the street and not able to be out and do more, what I consider more proactive work. So a lot of that funding is already in our budget to accomplish those tasks. And so adding additional officers is the first step so we can raise that minimum staffing level up. Some of the things that we hope will work is once the pilot program with Project Be Free, to see if, you know, that is it lowering our recidivism of having to respond to these domestic violence incidents. That takes a burden where those, you know, those calls aren't going to be there anymore. Now officers are able to respond to other calls as needed. So the goal is to have more officers available, and then where they're not on an actual call, that they're available to do more proactive work.
Chief, there's also the cameras that were just installed, so that will assist as well. That's just something that's new, so we don't have a lot of data on it yet, but they're already being very helpful.
They are, and those are the flock safety cameras.
Other questions, council? Acting Deputy Mayor Trout-Manuel, your microphone, please.
Yes. When we will get a report from Project Be Free?
It's a year pilot program.
Okay.
We started them in, I believe, March of this year. So they give us kind of almost a monthly report of utilization. And so I can get you kind of what they've given us so far, but they do a final report once the project is done.
Sure.
The pilot project is completed.
I understand that. It would be kind of helpful just to see what they've been doing. It's been how long that they've been there, since January? Just March? Okay. It would be nice just to have a little bit of information and then get the final report when they're done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. In that space of the ramp up for the new officers that we would be bringing into staff, you know, I think we've heard that it typically takes a year for someone to be onboarded and brought in and be able to be out on patrol. Are there other options from a, you know, community policing standpoint that we could explore that would be able to have more responders available earlier or faster than that year ramp up? I don't know if it's something where cities work with other police departments as far as bringing in additional staff or any other types of interlocal agreements, but what are the types of things that could be available if we were looking at that?
Well, the year is for brand new officers. That is time to go through the academy. We are somewhat successful in attracting lateral officers here. I just hired another one today. And so those can take a lot less than a year. We're required to have at least a 10-week training period for any experienced officer that we bring in. That is one of the other new requests that I haven't got to yet, that I'll talk about in just a moment on what we do to attract those officers. We already have mutual aid agreements with outside agencies, so if a large incident happens in Auburn, we can draw officers from Kent, Federal, Algona Pacific up to Auburn. We do assist them on similar type situations where they need additional staff.
Councilmember Rakes.
Thank you, Chief. Someone asked me a question today, and I honestly don't have all the answers, so I'm going to ask you. So you know the big, like Lowe's use them with the big lights in Safeway that has the blue lights, the police?
The blue lights that flash?
Yeah. Do those have cameras in them?
I believe all of them do, yes.
What this person wanted to know, would it be worth putting those on a couple streets, even as a deterrent for really bad areas we have in the city right now? Or would we have that in our budget?
Our department has different cameras that we use,
Okay.
that are a little bit more covert when we need extra cameras out there.
Okay.
Part of what we have right now, the flock safety cameras, but we do have covert cameras that we can put up on various locations depending on what is happening in those areas. We don't utilize any of those that you see at like the mall with the flashing blue lights. But we are able to get like their surveillance footage if they're actually recording and something occurs in like the Lowe's parking lot, that nature. We do work with Lowe's.
Okay. So would there be something that you could use in a neighborhood that's really bad right now? That
Something like that we would have to purchase. We don't, the city doesn't have anything of a similar nature. They can be quite expensive.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Keep going.
Okay, so I think that's it for that one. So the next one I want to talk about in our budget, I kind of forgot to mention, also included in the police budget is our cost for Valley Communications and our SCORE facility. One of our new requests is due to increase in Valley Communications operating costs. So they have gone up the next couple years. Part of those, cost increases that we're seeing are from the change to the PCERN entity and the cost for having our radios on the PCERN entity system. So we used to pay approximately $6 per radio. That cost has gone up to $39 per radio. And when you're talking having over 200 radios on the system, it's a quite large increase. And that, it includes the operating costs. Valleycom also increased their budget because of additional staff. Back. This way? Okay. So they've increased their costs just due to their personnel costs as well. So Auburn's share of the overall operating costs is $150,000 in 2025 and 2026. So that will be it is an ongoing cost as we are an owner city of the communication center. The next request that we have in the police does cover hiring bonuses for new hires. It includes both entry-level and lateral officers. We currently offer a $5,000 bonus for entry-level officers and a $20,000 bonus for lateral officers. And so those are ongoing costs. We don't always reach the full amount, but it's projected that we may reach that, so we're budgeting for that, both in 25 and 26.
And just to add a little bit more context to that, that is something that we've had in the budget for the last 2 years, and it was funded with ARPA funding. Since that ARPA funding has been used, the program is working well with the attraction of new and lateral officers. We wanted to go ahead and keep that in the budget.
Okay, moving on to SCORE. SCORE, as you know, is our regional misdemeanor facility. Thank you. Located in Des Moines. We are one of the owner cities of SCORE. The owner contributions total of all the cities that are an owner is 14 million in 2025 and 2026. Overall, it is a decrease in the owner costs. However, the rates are divided amongst the owner cities. Auburn is by far the largest user of the SCORE facility. We have the most bookings and the highest average daily population in SCORE. So even though the overall costs for all the cities went down, we still have an increase for the next 2 years of approximately $990,000. So the overall increase to our current budget, though, we're looking at an increase of $200,000 in 2025 and $200,000 in 2026 to our current budget. So we've been able to absorb most of the costs. And the costs, the average of the daily population is a 3-year average, 3 years average. And, you know, I think other cities need to start doing their part, but Auburn is a heavy user of SCORE, so.
And at SCORE, the executive director is doing a fabulous job of contracting with other cities, which will also bring down the cost to the member cities.
Which is one of the reasons why the owner city contributions in total decreased, because she has been so aggressive at finding other agencies to participate and really making sure that they're paying their fair share of the use of SCORE. And historically, some of the larger agencies were actually getting a better rate on their average daily population costs than even the owner agencies were. So she's really come back to them and said, sharpened her pencil and is making them carry their fair share of their use of the facility.
Okay.
Question?
And-
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
My apologies. Go ahead.
I was going to say the final section for police is our drug forfeiture fund. It's Fund 117. The funding from that results from drug seizures and projected drug seizures, both federal and state seizures. We do fund 2 detectives that are assigned to task force out of that seizure fund. There are no changes projected within the seizure fund. As the budget for the next 2 years goes on, if there is a need for something to be paid out of those are something we would usually bring in a budget amendment. But as of now, there are no changes to what is budgeted. I believe that's-
And that
Questions?
Concludes the police portion.
Thank you,
Unless anybody
Chief.
has questions.
Questions from council? Councilmember Baldwin.
I think you've answered this in previous years when we had the hiring bonuses, but just to confirm, if someone is brought in and receiving either the $5,000 or the $20,000 hiring bonus, is that paid out in a staggered form or is that a one-time payment? When does an individual receive that in that hiring process?
It's staggered form. Usually it's half when they are hired, and then half when they make, the other half when they make probation.
Okay, and that's at 90 days?
It's a year.
Year, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that we do have language with new hires. Now, if they decide to move on and it's not, basically they don't want to move on, it's either a termination, that they do have to reimburse the city for their bonus, their hiring bonus. So.
Questions, council?
Yes, I had one. Can you see my hand?
Yes, Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know if you can see the hand in the corner. Anyway, I just had a question about the 140,000, Chief. How is that factored? How did we come to that number?
So I missed what your question was.
I said, how did the 140,000 for the retention? Can you hear me?
Oh, for the retention bonus, how did you calculate
Yes.
the
Yeah. How do we
140,000?
account for that number?
So we look at basically the number of openings we have, and we try to look at, on average, who we've been hiring, whether they've been lateral or entry level, and try and project what bonuses will be paid. If, if they're all laterals, it's a lot higher bonus. So it's kind of a
It's an algebra problem.
yeah, it's our best guess based on our past history of the ratio of hiring entry-level to lateral officers.
And historically, it's been a pretty good guess. It's what we had budgeted annually for ARPA, and it's pretty close to what on average, to what we've been spending the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
And I'm going to hand it back over to Director Gaub to go over her Public Works budget.
All right, so good evening. So just for the record, Ingrid Gaub, Public Works Director. So we're going to talk to you tonight about the Public Works Department, but only a portion of the Public Works Department. So as you might recall, we're made up of 3 different service areas. We have our engineering service area, our M&O service area, and our airport service area. Tonight, we're only going to focus on the general fund portion for engineering and the general fund portion for M&O, which is our streets and vegetation division. So the other 5 funds that we have that make up the department we'll actually talk about tomorrow. So for engineering, we're going to start there. So for the general fund programs that are funded through our engineering division, that includes our transportation and our right-of-way management, our permitting and development activity, our traffic signals operations and maintenance, our capital project management, which is mostly funded by capital project funds and can be across several different funds, but there's a small portion that is funded by the general fund for those staff. Those staff provide the services for surveying, project engineering and management, design, construction inspection, and for contract administration. And then this is also where a portion of the general administration for the department is paid out of. So on page 147, it does show that engineering division has 60 FTEs. However, that is a little bit misleading because not all of those positions are paid for with the general fund revenues. A large portion of those staff are actually paid for with utility funds and with those capital fund projects. So it's about an equivalent of about 33 FTEs that are funded by the general fund, with only about 9 of those positions being 100% general fund funded for our transportation program. So some of the highlights that we had for 2023, 2024. So you might recall some of the discussion that we had earlier this year on our pavement condition index and where we're at with our pavement preservation program. So part of what we did in 23 and 24 is we began implementing the additional funding that council implemented in 2023 for those programs. So we continue moving that forward. We also finalized the bridges annexation and took over that area of Kent. In addition, we actually finalized the annexation change, boundary line change between us and the city of Sumner down along Lake Tapps Parkway, which basically moved a portion of Lake Tapps Parkway from the city of Auburn to the city of Sumner in front of what was the Sumner Golf Course. We also completed 2 neighborhood studies under our new traffic calming program. So that identified improvements in a more proactive and more equitable way for 2 significant neighborhoods within Auburn. One of those neighborhoods we are actually under construction right now for the improvements identified in that traffic calming program, and the other neighborhood will have those improvements under construction in 2025. As we talked about earlier, we also completed the implementation of the school zone photo enforcement program, putting 12 cameras into operation. And again, for the 23-24 school year, we issued 28,884 infractions for noncompliance, and that actually dropped from our noncompliance numbers when we did our study for that to the noncompliance numbers where we're at now. It went from 27% of the traffic to 2% of the traffic, so a significant reduction in the amount of speeding that we are seeing through those school zones. Between 2023 and so far year to date in 2024, we've actually received 7 transportation grant awards. We've also received 2 increases to previous grant awards, and we received 1 Public Works Trust Fund loan award. all of those totaling about $20.2 million towards transportation projects. Those funds will be received between now and 2028 in the program, and we still have some pending applications waiting on decisions for this year. By the end of this year, we'll also have completed our comprehensive transportation plan update, which was a significant undertaking as we changed that from the standard level of service for vehicles to incorporating multimodal level of service, as well as incorporating, again, that safety action plan. We also completed several efforts related to mapping for disadvantaged and underserved populations within the city so that we could use that information in some of our planning decisions and our project decisions. We also moved 2 staff from GIS, from IT's GIS group into Public Works' GIS group to consolidate that into one GIS staff that provides services for the full city, and that's basically our mapping for all of our various facilities and systems. We also completed more than 300 repairs on sidewalks using some new equipment that we actually purchased in the previous biennium. And that allowed us to do those improvements for those sidewalks without having to remove the panels, so allowed us to do the sidewalk grinding, which is a significant improvement over what it would take to do those improvements previously. We also completed the conversion of our city-owned streetlights to LED. We are still working with PSE slowly on the conversion of streetlights that they own, but we pay for the electricity on, to LED. We're nearing completion of the addition of our sign shop inventory for our asset database, and we completed several improvements to our asset management system, NC-Click Fix, that has actually benefited both our department as well as other departments in our processes for how we handle complaints and issues. So for goals as we go into 2025, 2026, so we continue working on our equity improvements and how we incorporate equity into our decisions and our processes, both on the engineering as well as on the maintenance and operations side, and developing the tools that we need and the data that we need to actually make that useful products. We will continue also to have discussions with the City of Pacific about another potential annexation, de-annexation from the City of Pacific along A Street Southeast, just north of White River. So there's a small portion of Pacific that is surrounded by the City of Auburn. It incorporates mostly A Street Southeast, so we continue those discussions with the City of Pacific. We intend to, if the decision package is approved, to do the completion of the evaluation for the expanded photo enforcement program and for the general speed enforcement throughout the city. Continue to improve our proactive response for our street maintenance as our workload and our immediate needs allow. And again, continue to work with PSE to convert those streetlights to LEDs to reduce our cost for electricity. And then grants, and more grants. We will continue, as always, to go after grants for funding. When we get down to the budget highlights, so the baseline change, you'll see a fairly significant percentage there. However, that is primarily due to wages and benefits and to that moving of 2 positions from IT into Public Works. And then the other portion of that increase is that insurance liability as well. So no other increases, significant increases for engineering, and there are no program requests. For our street side, thank you, the Street and Vegetation Division, just to give you a little background of what they do. So they do all the maintenance for our transportation system except for the traffic signals, which is done through the Engineering Division. So that includes our signs, our lights, our guardrails, our pavement, our sidewalks. And the Vegetation Management Division does all the public roads, street sweeping, roadside mowing, ditch mowing, for the maintenance of our road system. There is a portion of that vegetation staff that actually does our maintenance of vegetation for our stormwater system, so that's our ponds and our bioswales, and those positions and portions of positions are paid for by the Storm Fund. Lastly, this staff is also the staff that provides the majority of inclement weather and emergency response services. So that includes our snow and ice response, wind, traffic crashes, trees down, landslides, you name it, this is the staff that handles most of those emergency responses. So again, for this particular one, there's not significant increases planned over the baseline. Is basically due to wages and benefits for staff and for that, again, insurance liability as well. And there are no program improvements planned for this division.
Thank you, Director Gaub. Questions, council? All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, that concluded our portion of the general fund presentations. So all of the presentations that you heard on Monday, all the way through Director Gaub, is everything that we are planning for our baseline budget for the general fund, plus any of the new requests. So I'm going to move right into our general governmental capital. So again, this is capital needs to help support the primary function of government. So this doesn't have anything, we're not going to be talking any of our utilities or any of our proprietary funds. We're going to be talking today specifically about capital as it supports the general purpose of government. So all of the operating costs that we've talked about for the last day and a half, now we're going to talk about the capital costs to provide those same services. So we have two ways in which we really look at the capital projects. One is within the biennial budget, and the second is in the 6-year capital facilities plan, or the CFP. We are required by the Growth Management Act to adopt a CFP, which it's our way of being able to show that we're looking at all of our future capital needs, and that we are thinking about funding and trying to secure funding to accomplish those capital needs. It ties back into the budget because we always budget for the current 2 years within that CFP. And we only budget for what has been fully funded. So there might be a lot of projects in that 6-year CFP, some of which are pushed out into out years because we haven't secured all of the funding that we need to get those grants or to get those projects completed. For instance, we might have some high priority projects, but we can't commit funding. We can't ask council to commit funding and expenditures towards those capital programs if we don't actually have a way to pay for them. So in the CFP, the first 2 years will also be incorporated into the actual biennial budget as well as the separate CFP document. Just by the way we operate our capital funds, we automatically carry forward any unspent capital project funds from year to year if the project is not yet complete at the end of the year. So that's our way of recommitting those capital expenditures. If we have contractors that are in the process of doing work for us, it's the way we continue to keep that budget committed to those projects and to those contractors doing the work for us. Our governmental capital has many different funding sources. Ingrid had pointed out grants. So grants are integral to our general governmental capital. We also rely heavily on our real estate excise tax, which we collect separately and keep in the capital improvement fund. That's new this year. Historically, we combined our real estate excise tax into the capital improvement fund. We are keeping it separate from all of the actual capital projects. We're keeping the real estate excise tax in its own separate fund, beginning in 2025, moving forward. We have our impact fees. For the city, we collect 2 types of impact fees, our traffic impact fees and our park impact fees. And those are also collected and kept exclusively in the mitigation fee fund. We also use utility taxes. We have per our code, we have 2.5% of our internal utility taxes, our city utility taxes that are committed to the street improvement and repair program in our city. And then 1% of the other utilities, those external utilities, also go in and fund our general governmental capital. And then new in 2023 was the 0.1% sales tax that we levied, the council had adopted to levy for our transportation benefit district, and that is collected in its own exclusive fund, and that money needs to be used exclusively for the preservation of our streets. Combined, between the different capital projects that we have and the different types of revenue sources we have. We have many different types of capital project funds. We have 3 funds, as I just alluded to, that are exclusive just to the collection and holding restricted type revenues. So there aren't any capital projects that take place in these funds. The purpose of these funds is solely to collect that revenue and keep that revenue there. And then as it's needed to be used to fund capital projects and other funds, we transfer the money out into those other funds. So those 3 funds are the Real Estate Excise Tax Fund. At the end of this year, we estimate we'll have $5.7 million available in REIT funding. And REIT can be used in a couple of different ways, but it's primarily related to the acquisition, construction, repair, rehabilitation of city facilities. Now, there's 2 types of REIT funding. There's REIT 1 and REIT 2. REIT 2 is slightly more restricted in the sense that you can't use it for city facilities and administrative offices, whereas REIT 1, you can use it for city facilities and administrative offices. But other than that, you can use that REIT funding mostly for most types of infrastructure that the city may need. At the end of 2025, 2026, we expect to collect an additional, on top of that $5.7 million that we expect to end 2024 with, we expect to collect another $3.6 million over the biennium. So when we're putting our capital project budgets together, these are some of the numbers that we're putting together and we're analyzing. We're trying to identify what funding sources are even available to help us prioritize which projects we're able to get done in the biennium. In the mitigation fund, I mentioned we have traffic impact fees and park impact fees. We expect to have traffic impact funds available, $5.2 million through the biennium, and park impact fees available through 2026, total $570,000. That's a small number. We've had been accumulating those park impact fees for quite some time, and over the last couple of years, we had programmed them out and spent them down on a couple of large projects, which is typically what we need to do with those impact fees. The impact fees have to be used for expansions as it relates to development, which is what is actually paying into those impact fees. And so it usually takes several years to accumulate enough funding to actually fund those expansion projects. And so we just got done going through a cycle of spending down those park impact fees. The third fund we hold for specific restricted revenue is our Transportation Benefit District Fund, and that we estimate to generate $4.4 million in that 0.1% sales tax over the biennium. And again, that must be used to preserve, maintain, and operate our existing transportation infrastructure. In the funds that we're actually completing and budgeting the expenditure side, the actual capital projects themselves, they happen in one of 4 funds. That is the General Transportation Fund, which has, for the biennium, 21 projects in the current biennium budget. We have the Capital Improvement Fund, which has 7 projects being proposed in the biennium, the Local Revitalization Fund, which has 1 project, and then the Municipal Parks Construction Fund that has 5 projects. So I'm going to start off with the first and not arguably the largest, which is the General Transportation Fund, which is the fund where we are, and historically this was 3 funds. We're making some changes for efficiency purposes. And beginning in 2025, we are combining those 3 funds into 1 fund. So all of our capital street projects are being budgeted for and paid for out of just this 1 fund. So for historical context on where we've been at with funding our general transportation projects, is you may recall in early 2022, the council had put together an ad hoc committee to look at what the city's long-term preservation needs for general transportation was. We had a need of about $7 million a year to be able to fund the preservation of our street system. And what we had currently available in funding wasn't sustainable to achieve that $7 million a year. So in that ad hoc committee, staff presented to the committee the funding plan that was then later listened to and adopted to by council. We implemented a 0.1% sales tax which is that TBD sales tax I mentioned earlier that generates about $4.4 million over the 2 years. We also implemented an additional 1.5% city utility tax, or an increase of 1.5% to our city utility taxes effective January 1st, 2023. The third element that the ad hoc committee had considered was a $20 car tab fee, which we had considered maybe implementing as early as January 1, 2025. But at this time, the grant funding that we're currently receiving is sufficient, and we don't necessarily need to consider the car tab fee at this point. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, at this point, we have sufficient funding for that $7 million annually through 2027 with the recent grant awards that we've received. So as we move into the next budget cycle, this will again be another consideration depending upon how many grants we're able to achieve in the next biennium for, again, those future projects beyond 2027.
So that leads us to where we're at today in the 2025-2026 budget. This is a breakdown of all of the different funding sources that we are budgeting to fund our project. So this isn't necessarily the breakdown of all of the revenues that we've received across all of these different funding types. This is just how we plan to spend it down and how what percentage of the sources we'll be using to fund the current capital projects in the 25-26 budget. So we've got the 0.1% sales tax levy, which accounts to 16% of the total funding for our transportation fund. The 2.5% city utility tax plus 1% from all of those external utilities generates about $3.5 million and $3.3 million each year over the biennium. We have $7.5 million programmed over the biennium in impact fees, $650,000 in REIT funds, and then $1.4 million over the biennium in the photo enforcement program, in the existing photo enforcement program that is a new decision package that Ingrid will talk about in a couple of slides. And that money will be dedicated to street safety programs. And now I'll hand it over to Ingrid.
So on the screen you have the summary of the general transportation program and the amount of projects that we have planned for the 25-26 biennium. As Jamie mentioned, we're reducing that down to one fund. So previously we had our 103 and our 105, which did our local street preservation and our arterial street preservation. Those both are now part of what was previously our arterial fund, which is 102, which is now labeled the General Transportation Fund. So within that, we have different types of projects for different purposes, capacity preservation, non-capacity loan payments, and then transfers out for other projects in other funds. One thing I wanted to note on this slide, so under preservation, you see an asterisk on that, and that is because we have two projects that are within the capacity projects that are actually also partially preservation projects. So when you look at the total on this chart and you see preservation, and we've just talked about our goal is $7 million a year, there's actually $2 million in 2025 that's part of the capacity projects and $1 million in 2026 that's part of the capacity projects that are actually preservation funds. So we are getting closer. We're about $6.3 million for both of those years. Again, in 2027, we actually, with the new grants, we have a full $7 million planned for that 2027 year. And in 2024, we are actually exceeding that $7 million per year because we are spending down some of our current fund balance on existing projects. So we're more than good enough for meeting that $7 million a year intent behind the ad hoc committee's discussion and decisions and recommendations. For the projects as we go forward for the TIP, so you all approved the Transportation Improvement Plan in June. This budget is based upon that Transportation Improvement Plan, so it incorporates those projects that were identified in the TIP, in this project list, and the current ongoing projects, so it's all consistent with that. As far as the types of projects that we have in there, before I go to that, one other thing that this fund funds is the joint agreement with Pierce County and with King County for the Route 497 bus route into Lakeland Hills that serves the Sounder Station. And so that is about $195,000 a year for that agreement. That agreement is actually up in 2025, so we hope to renegotiate that with both of our partners on that agreement and keep that route running. And so that is also included in that budget for both years. For the projects, of those 10 projects that are highlighted for capacity, those include some fairly significant projects for us. So we have the Auburn Way South improvements, the widening between Hemlock and Redwood Court, which will be under construction hopefully later this year. We have the East Valley Highway widening south of Lakeland Hills Way down to Lake Taps Parkway. And that's a fully grant-funded project. We have our Lee Hill Road and 104th Avenue roundabout intersection improvement. Again, another fully funded grant project. We have our M Street Northeast widening from Main to 4th Street Northeast. So that's currently in design with the intent to go to construction next year. R Street Southeast and 21st Street intersection, we have our roundabout planned for that one, which is also another grant-funded project. We have our R Street widening from 22nd Street to 23rd Street, which ties in the improvements both at the roundabout at 21st as well as the current preservation project happening south of 33rd to improve that corridor and add additional southbound capacity. And then we have our Southeast 304th and 116th Avenue roundabout, which is intended to be in design and construction to address a level of service need up in the Lee Hill area. For our non-capacity projects, that includes traffic signal replacement in future year. And then preservation, there are several preservation projects on there, 10 total, I believe. We have our A Street Southeast preservation from 37th to Lakeland Hills Way. We have our C Street Southwest preservation from the GSA signal to Ellingson Road. Those projects, one will be under construction later this year, and actually I think both of those will be under construction later this year. And then we have our local street preservation projects for both 2025 and 2026, which include several locations throughout the city. For this program, there is one program request, as Jamie alluded to, which is to look at the additional revenues that have come in under our existing photo enforcement program. So this is the school zone photo enforcement program. Our original budget projected, I think, $640,000 for revenue on that, above and beyond what it was necessary to pay for the program. We have well exceeded that. And so we are proposing to bring about $705,000 of that annually into the transportation program to fund those safety improvements. And those include our traffic signal replacements, our ITS dynamic messaging signs, our active transportation program. So that would be sidewalks and bikes and non-motorized facilities, and ongoing additional funds to fund the necessary costs of refreshing our channelization and pavement markings throughout the city, which is a continuing to increase cost for us to maintain that federally regulated requirement. That program improvement, again, as with the other program improvement, it's consistent with our draft comprehensive transportation plan policies to incorporate more active transportation needs and funded programs into our system. It's consistent with our comprehensive safety action plan, which you'll hear about here in a couple of weeks. And it aligns with that national safe systems approach and helps us meet some of those unfunded mandates from those federal regulations. With that, any questions?
Council, any questions for Director Gaub? Councilmember Rakes.
Thank you. That was a very good presentation. On the 104th and going up Lee Hill, when is that one expected to start?
So that one is in design right now, and it was expected to be in construction in 2027 because we do have some fairly significant environmental and some final right-of-way acquisition to do for that project, and the grant funds that we just received are allocated for 2027.
Okay. Can I follow?
Go ahead for the follow-up.
How are we going to maneuver while you're doing the roundabout, the traffic going up the hill? Has that been figured out?
So that'll be part of the design for the project. There'll
Okay.
be some staging that will be included in that to ensure that we can either maintain traffic, or where we do need to close the intersection, how long do we need to close it for so that we can construct the necessary improvements. But I would anticipate that we would have similar to how we did Auburn Way South with the roundabout we did up there, you'll have traffic operating on one side of the road and then moving to the other side of the road.
Okay, thank you.
Acting Deputy Mayor Trout Manuel.
Thank you again. I'll echo. What a great presentation. Out of all of these 10 roundabouts or streets that we're going to be working on, how many of them are starting next year?
So we have several projects that are under construction right now and or will go under construction this year that will be under construction next year. So of the projects that I went through, I believe we have the intent for the M Street widening from Main to 4th to be under construction in late 2025, and the roundabout at R and 21st to be under construction in 2025.
Okay. And they're all funded through grants, or are we still looking for some more funds?
So all of the 10 programs for capacity are either funded through grants for impact fees, through REIT funds, or through, for those that have preservation associated with them, which are 2 of them, those city utility taxes, the TBD funds.
Thank you for bringing this
Yeah,
up.
it's all of that.
Thank you. I was reading while you were doing that, so thank you. Yeah, thank you for that report.
Other questions, Council? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. This is probably maybe more for Director Thomas, because I'm curious about the change in the funds going from, I think it's 103 and 105 into the 102. Is that just kind of, what's the nature behind that, I guess?
It helps eliminate a lot of transferring back and forth between, if you've got one fund that's paying for the entire project and then having to do transfers in from other funds to help combined resources in order to pay for the project. Really what we really need to achieve is to kind of isolate those special or restricted revenues, in which is what we did. So even that we combined the capital spending into one fund, and then the actual restricted resources into another fund. So that was what our goal was to keep the restricted funds separate and then combine one fund for all the construction expenses themselves.
So, and if I can add to that, so what we found in the last few years is that many of our projects actually combined all 3 of those funds to some level in a single project. And so managing that across 3 funds was much more difficult and time-consuming for both my staff and for Director Thomas's staff to manage that. And so combining that into one fund actually eases some of that and makes that a little bit more efficient, as long as Director Thomas said, we're allocating those TBD funds to be managed separately, where they're more restricted funds, so that they're only going towards those projects that are identified in the TIP for TBD funds.
Okay. Follow on?
Follow up.
Part of the reason I was asking is because when we had done the 2022, I don't think I was on that committee, but I was on council, the recommendations, I couldn't remember if there was any language either in that or in the tip that would have specified the particular funds by name or title. So I wasn't sure if there was any type of sort of updating of documents we'd have to do around either.
No, there should not be any need to do that. Again, the programming document that we use under the Transportation Benefit District is the TIP. And the TIP identifies where those Transportation Benefit District funds are spent to, which projects are eligible for that. And so that's what's used then in the budgeting process for which projects can receive funds from that special revenue fund, restricted revenue fund.
Right, and RCW also restricts how those funds can be used, and so our code references the RCW as far as the allowable use, which is something that Director Gaub's staff manages very closely. So as we're transferring money out of the TBD fund, it's going to very specific allowable costs for funding.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking from the 2022 recommendations we had approved, I vaguely recall having the 103 and the 105 in a lot of the materials we had reviewed, so I didn't know if there needed to be any retroactive, re-referencing, but I think
actually the Fund 105, I think, was referenced in the utility for the the use of the utility tax, the dedicated 2.5% utility tax. And that was actually something that we updated at the time, which is removing the references to the funds. That was very old language, and we removed the specific fund from the code language at that time.
Okay, great, just checking.
Other questions, council? All right.
Right. Now we'll move on to the other capital fund, which is the capital improvement fund. So moving away from transportation projects into more general capital funds. And we'll have, in a little bit, we'll have Director Faber also come up and talk about some of his projects as it relates to the capital improvement fund. But to just talk about the funding sources that go into this fund, it's and the projects that we pay for out of this fund. We pay for a little bit of everything. So we have street and sidewalk projects, we have parks projects, economic and downtown development projects, facility upgrades. We even pay a portion of our debt service out of the capital improvement fund. And then the sources for funding those projects is either REIT, grants, sometimes there's some miscellaneous fees in lieu of type charges that go towards capital funding out of this fund. And most significantly in this budget proposal is some bond proceeds, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Normally the chart doesn't look this skewed, but the bond proceeds is a significant consideration for the 25-26 budget. I'm going to hand this over now to Director Gaub to talk about just the total projects being budgeted for.
Okay, so on this one, so the first item there, the total projects budgeted, 8.2 million plus 705,000 for the debt service in there. The majority of those projects are related to transportation that we fund in there, and those include things such as our First Street and Division Street PRED improvements, which is also a grant-funded project. So our active transportation program that we discussed back when we approved the TIP to add that in, consistent with our capital or our comprehensive transportation plan. The annual traffic signal improvements, again, that neighborhood traffic safety program. And then the street lighting improvements, again, that is adding street lights when we need to, as well as the conversion for PSE's lights to LED. And then the significant one for Public Works in this one, and it covers actually Public Works, Parks, and PD, is the Facility Master Plan. So as Jamie indicated on there, that is the significant project that identifies the bond proceeds. So if you go back to the previous conversations we've had on this, the intent behind this is that we would be issuing debt for up to $39.1 million in order to complete improvements for Public Works' M&O facility, Parks' M&O facility, and for the police. Not a new justice center, but a portion of improvements for police. So this request for funds actually identifies how we're going to pay that debt service for that bond, which is paid for by a combination of general fund revenue and utility fund revenue. General fund revenue to the tune of about 1.2 million, and utility funds about 1 million across water, sewer, and storm, so about 333,000 each for those utilities to pay that debt service so that we can continue to move that project forward and do the improvements that we discussed under that facility master plan in the last budget cycle.
And because there are a lot of numbers there associated with that new request, just pointing out there's really kind of two ways of spending that money. The first one is we're going to receive a large lump sum of bond proceeds, so we're asking then to be able to have the authority to spend those bond proceeds. Through a bond ordinance, we would get the authority from council to spend those bond proceeds on these identified capital projects. But then once we've issued the debt, we're also going to have that debt service that we have to pay back as well. Were there any questions on the facility master plan?
Councilmember Baldwin.
Thanks. Last time we talked about potential bonds was, I don't know, 6 months ago, I think. So in order to be able to move forward with that as part of our budget plan for 25-26, you mentioned having a bond ordinance to go with that. What do we need as far as passing that as a council body?
So that will be a whole separate piece of legislation that we would be bringing to council when we come closer to the time of actually needing to issue the bonds, when we actually need the money. So I think, what would the timing?
Yeah, so
that
we
be?
would expect to see that bond issuance sometime probably in late 2025, early 2026. And so we'd go through that process for that bond evaluation with bond counsel and everybody else before that comes forward. And then how those bonds work for capital improvements is there is work that we can do prior to issuance of those bonds that can be reimbursed against those bonds after they're issued. And so it's a timing nuance to making sure that we issue those bonds late enough in the process that we capture those design costs that are spent prior to that point, and we issue them prior to doing that construction, that first construction piece where we need those funds to pay that, so that we have the maximum amount of time that we need to spend down those bonds.
Other questions, council? Councilmember Baldwin.
And then for that bond, is that one where we would need to be going out to the community or just within council?
No, this wouldn't, we would be pledging our existing resources to pay back the debt service. So that's the $1.2 million from the general fund and $1 million combined from the three utility funds. You could see the impact on Monday when we were looking through the non-departmental budget. There was a large increase in costs in the non-departmental budget, and that was related to the repayment of the debt service.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Okay. I wanted to bring your attention to page 45 and probably have Director Faber come up too if he is available to talk about the details. This is not an actual request for the 25-26 budget, but it is a project in our CFP, and I know that it is an important project to council. So that is the Auburn Downtown Theater, and I just wanted to talk about what we have currently in the existing 2024 budget, the budget amendments that we're going to be bringing forward to council before the end of this year, and then have Director Faber answer any specific questions that you might have. But right now, if you look at page 45, you can see that what we have is $11.9 million in this project worksheet. We don't actually have $11.9 million budgeted right now, since our philosophy is that we only put in budget what we actually have funding available. We haven't fully budgeted for this item. So right now, we currently are short $2 million. So we currently have $9.9 million or $8 million budgeted for this project. And the budget amendment that we will be bringing to you later this year will be to identify new funding sources and to reallocate and reprioritize some existing funding sources in order to achieve the total $12 million budget that we need to complete the theater project. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I plan on coming forward to study session. I believe it's on October 28th to kind of brief the council on the design and the plan. And that'll be also based on what Jamie has put together on our funding package. And so we're at a point now, I think, where it'd be great to share everybody with the plan as well as another potential project that we're going to be reviewing related to the theater as well. So approximate 300-seat theater located on where Nelson's Jeweler was. It's a really exciting plan. I know the community's waiting, and I know council's been waiting for this one too.
So all of that to say, we're not asking for anything in this budget for that particular project, but there is more coming, more information coming.
Acting Deputy Mayor Troutman.
Director Faber, all the theater functions that we've been having at the high school, we're still collecting funds from that to go towards our theater, or?
Well, no, the revenues that we produce through our existing programs, whether it be at the PAC or at Green River College or at the Postmark, go back into the general fund as just a regular revenue. They're not
Okay.
earmarked for capital. It's two separate operations. So the revenues that you see listed, like on page 45, those are all through either grants or foundations or city resources, not through earned revenues.
Okay, so that revenue has all been going to the general
Yeah.
funds? Okay,
Similar to when we operated the old Auburn Ave.
okay, thank you.
Other questions, council? Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you. Just want to make sure I heard correctly, is that right now we've got about 8 million in budget and short about 2, is that right?
4.
Short 4.
Yeah. I misspoke earlier.
It's all right. I was just going to say, I'm like, because I'm like, that doesn't quite add up the way I would expect it to. Okay, and we'll expect to see some of that coming out with budget amendments. Is that going to be with the October session, or like looking at my quarters?
The budget, the budget amendment is set to come, will be adopted the first week of December, so we'll be bringing it to you in November, which would be, Daryl's presentation will occur first, then we'll bring the budget amendment, and then adoption.
Okay. Exciting.
Good. Thank you.
Other questions from councils? Council? All right.
All right. Now we're going to move into our next capital projects fund, and that's the Municipal Parks Fund. And conveniently, we have Director
Already
Faber
here.
all ready to go.
Yeah, it's conveniently called the 321 Fund, and on page 317 in your budget book. Well, the actual detail is the others are on page, I think, 313. So we have a limited number of projects coming forward in the next 2 years as we build, as Jamie mentioned, build back our impact fee fund, so we can continue to fund projects for growth in Auburn. The primary ones are listed on the screen in front of you. New downtown plaza and alleyway improvement. This is a project that will be located right next to the new proposed theater and link the Postmark to Main Street. Some of the property of that we own on the current Auburn Ave and the drawing a blank on the name of the building we bought, the fire site, Nelson
Max.
Jeweler site,
The
Max
Max.
House, is larger than the size of the theater, so we'll be able to get a downtown plaza down there, which I think will really help the revitalization of downtown. So this is funded with a grant from the state and a grant from the county. The $1.2 million, that also includes a potential acquisition that we'll be coming to you with as well. The Jacobson Tree Farm project that's listed there, phase 1, we did a master plan of the tree farm 10-15 years ago, and it's never been funded, and we're starting to apply for grants for that site. That's located up by Auburn Mountain View High School. It's commonly thought of as the next game farm park in Auburn, just a multiple use park. And so we're going to be going to the community and redoing that master plan. A lot of the work is already done, but in that generation, since we did this plan, other activities have really grown in popularity, and how we plan on phasing that parks development has probably changed. And so we're going to go out to the community, get some more input. There's been a lot of growth around that site, and so that's what this is funding, is an update to the master plan and then some initial probably trail improvements at that site. And in the meantime, we'll be applying for grants that are recognized in the capital plan for the 27-28 years. Park improvement projects, those are our miscellaneous projects, and those are typically funded by our King County Prop $2. Every city in King County gets 1% of the levy that they allocate. We typically get about $300,000 a year that we can use to improve our existing facilities, replace picnic shelters, roofing projects, add capacity like the bike park at Cedar Lanes. And so these are miscellaneous projects that we can use the King County dollars around our community, and those are recognized in our deferred maintenance plan and also the city's parks capital plan. Sunset Park improvements, it's hard to believe we have to do improvements at Sunset Park, but it's 22 years old. It was the first park that I dedicated, so it's really old if I've been here that long. So we're looking at the land up at Sunset Park. There's quite a bit of it as kind of non-used up on a little knoll, as well as the skateboard park, basketball court area needs to be modernized, potentially with the addition of pickleball courts and other activities. So we're working with the Lakeland Hills community on master planning that. You can't use King County funds for that because they're not in King County. So we'll be using some of our own impact fees and other grants available for that community with some improvements planned for next year. The fairway drainage improvements, we've been doing this for about a dozen years now. It's funded through REIT. 2, for capacity, we've been able to make a complete change at our Auburn golf course by continuing to improve the fairway drainage, which has increased our rounds, which increases our revenues. So this continues a program that we've been doing for numerous years with amazing results. I can guarantee that that $30,000 a year has brought in way more than $30,000 a year thanks to the team that's out there. So those are the main projects that are funded. There's a few other smaller ones in there that are kind of mostly grant funded. There's a little bit of money left at the Dykstra Footbridge project, which was funded through ARPA for some safety improvements that links Dykstra Park to Isaac Evans. We've completed some of those, and the rest of those is going to be part of that budget amendment that comes forward, as it costs far less than anticipated. There's also a project out at the Mary Olson Farm. I'll market that. If you're out there this weekend for Hops and Crops, you'll notice it. There's a caretaker's modular mobile home out there that's very, very old and tired, and we're applying for a foreclosure grant as well as some impact fees to replace that modular home with an updated one, as well as the septic system that it's on. So some minor projects as well. A little slowdown actually in capital construction, mainly because on the smaller ones we do ourselves, and the larger ones we partner with Public Works and Engineering, and so we have a few more of those larger ones, specifically the theater and plaza project. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions, council? Acting Deputy Mayor Trout Manuel.
Mr. Faber, how many pickleball courts do we have?
In our system,
Yeah.
we have 12 at Game Farm, 1 at Shaughnessy, adding another one at Scooty Brown right now, so there'll be 2 there. Not near enough. 4 indoor at Lescove. We could do 50 pickleball courts, and they would all be busy. That's one of the things we're staying on top of is pickleball. One of the grants we have in now is to light the ones at Game Farm, as well as the basketball court there. All the soccer and baseball fields are lit, but the pickleball, basketball isn't. So in this time of year, the park stays lit, except the people who want to play pickleball basically get sent home.
Okay.
And that could be a capacity project because you're increasing capacity.
Because it is becoming very popular all over the place. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
heard that they're looking for places to have a event to bring everybody into a city. So I
Yeah.
heard there's the National Leagues of Cities. So I was just wondering, how many do we have in our city?
Yeah, we have a nice number, but there's lots of capacity in some of the cities. Lacey, for instance, built one site that has, I think, what's called 21 kitchens, so it has 10 courts plus a kitchen. So
Okay.
it's very large in one covered facility.
Okay, how much does it cost to
build?
build one?
They're pretty inexpensive if they're outdoors. They're probably, you could do 4 courts for $200,000 probably.
Okay,
They're not
thank-
much to them, but you need land and something, you can't put them too close to a residence because the sound gets obnoxious if you're the neighbor.
Councilmember Rakes.
Thank you, Daryl. On the downtown plaza and alleyway improvements, do you know about when that will start?
Yes, you'll be briefed on that on October 21.
Okay,
And it'll begin first quarter of next year.
okay. And if we find property downtown, we can put a pickleball, like Seattle has one downtown?
I'm not aware of any downtown properties unless you have a vacant parking lot.
I'll work on that. Thanks.
You could do a tournament on Main like they used to do the basketball
Right,
tournament.
right?
Other questions, council?
Yes,
Councilmember
ma'am,
Baldwin.
Mayor. I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one question for Director Favor. I saw on the improvement program improvements, I saw that there was 60,000 for park security. What's that?
Yeah, we discussed that a little bit on Monday, but when we were having our ARPA funding, we were able to secure our locking of parks and clearing out the restrooms in the evening in high emphasis areas like Brandon Park, downtown, Les Grove, Cedar Lanes, using ARPA funds. When we stopped doing that, we saw an increase in vandalism in our parks. So this is bringing 60,000 back in so that we can have 7-day-a-week security in our parks through, we've been using a company called B-Force recently, and we'll probably just expand that contract.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Thank you, Mayor. Director Faber, I recall at some point in maybe the past year, you had brought forward, I think, kind of a sample design plan for redoing one of the parks, and I'm trying to remember which park that was. I believe it was along a waterfront. I remember there was a cabin. Am I losing it, or?
We don't have any waterfront parks with cabins, but it
I know, well,
sounds
that's what
intriguing.
I'm like, I don't
I'd
remember
like
if
to
it was
stay
like
there.
super aspirational.
Oh, maybe 100 and, well, no, I wouldn't do that. I'm not sure.
No cabin there.
It
No.
was, I think, theoretic, sort of big envisioning at the time.
Councilmember Baldwin, I think that was in some of the aspirational goals that you had, but I don't think there was anything that we, as the city, had any plans for.
I think the only place you could do something like that would be like at the 104th Street project, but man, with shoreline regulations and flooding in Auburn, that'd be a high lift.
What I was remembering was there was a park, and the cabin was not next to the river edge, even though that has been something that I think would be great to have. But no, I remember there was like a design diagram, and I see a hand over here, so I feel like I'm not the only one.
I remember that conversation.
Councilmember
Oh,
Rakes?
sorry. Sorry. I remember that, and it was at our retreat, and they were talking about the improvements down 104th at the beach down there, and you had talked about the cabins up. So it wasn't in council, but it was at the retreat.
Oh, there's a picnic shelter like we have in numerous of our parks, but not like cabins, overnight cabins that I'm aware of. There's nothing in our design for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Like I said, it was a vague memory that I felt like I saw it somewhere at some point, and I couldn't remember if that was anything that we would see coming up. So, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
And then last but not least is our fourth fund where we have some last remaining capital project activity in, and that is our local revitalization fund. This is an older fund that we had originally used to hold bond proceeds for our downtown local revitalization funding, also known as LRF. When we issue, a portion of that debt service is paid for by the state's, a portion of the state's sales tax, and I come to you every year in February asking us to re-levy that portion of the state sales tax, and we get about $250,000 a year from the state, and that $250,000 goes towards paying the debt service on those local revitalization bonds that we issued back in 2010. There was a very small balance of bond proceeds left in that local revitalization fund, and we leveraged those back in 2023, where we combined them with some ARPA funding and some REIT and a small handful of grants, and that is how we were able to fund that infrastructure project along Auburn Avenue and in front of the Auburn Avenue Theater and the Postmark Center for the Arts, and do some of the mostly infrastructure improvement and some sidewalk improvements along that Auburn Ave and Main Street corner. Did you want to add anything else, Ingrid?
Yeah, no, I think that sums it up. It's basically from the Postmark to Main Street, redoing the Main Street intersection, and then along Main Street across where the theater will be, through to the B Street Plaza, and then resurfacing the B Street Plaza as well, and redoing that area to make that a little bit easier for us to maintain on a regular basis, as well as addressing some lighting in downtown and some desire for overhead lighting across the street. So you'll see that as we bring some of the information for the theater forward in October, you'll see some of the plans for that as well.
And that concludes our capital funds.
Acting Deputy Mayor Trout Manuel.
Director, those plans that we saw of the theater, are those the ones that we're going to be using? Are you bringing some other ones for us to?
So when Darryl brings back the discussion on the theater in October, he will bring some more refined, as we've been going through those conceptual designs on the theater, he will be bringing some information about what that theater looks like. So what you saw in a previous presentation, those were very conceptual level. We have been working with our design consultants and with park staff to refine those down to what can be built to develop the budget for the project. That'll be taken into design next year for us to actually finish that project out end of this year, next year. And then along with that, we have been doing the design of what's identified here, which is that infrastructure project, which is also addressing some of the utility infrastructure in that area so that we can eventually vacate the alley that is behind the theater and next to the postmark as well, so that you have that area for kind of open area space next to the postmark. So.
Okay, I was just curious because I really like that design and the way the roof park was and everything, so I was just curious what we were going to be brought to us.
Yeah, you'll see where that concept has moved to now to fit the budget that we've identified.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions? Okay.
That brings us to the end of workshop number 2. For our meeting tomorrow, we will go over if there's any other follow-up questions. I think we answered everything. There was one outstanding item that I took a note down for, and we'll work to try to get that information by tomorrow. If we can't get it by tomorrow, we will provide it early next week. And then we'll be going through our internal service funds, our proprietary funds, our other funds, and then we'll take one last look at just kind of a snapshot of the general fund and the capital funds, and asking council for their final piece of feedback on the budget as it's been proposed.
Great. Thank you very much. Council, any final questions for this evening? All right, we are adjourned.